And even though everybody works their own different way in the way they talk to agencies, it can be a bit of a stigma sometimes, and trying to break into it, and it could put people off. So, as you're an independent agent, and as I've seen you talk about this quite a lot, you offer a lot that can allow people to get that to get that insight and how agencies work. So I was hoping to pick your brains, get you to offer some advice, some things that you feel would give back to the community. And we touched on it earlier. It's sort of the three key areas that you feel that we should be looking at or to understand, which then would allow anybody to go into an agency and then pitch what they want. And I think we started off by saying understanding how agency business work. So I wonder if you could run through that for us.
Yeah, certainly. I think that first, people tend to either pedestalize estate agents, that they somehow are kind of the fountains of all knowledge of the local property community, and that they're the gatekeepers to property. And that's not necessarily the case. I mean, I've told you my journey into agency, but an awful lot of people who work in a estate agency are not professional property investors. You wouldn't even really call them property professionals. The vast majority of people, they are working in a estate agency because when they were 16 or 18 or 21, they applied for a whole bunch of jobs and they didn't get the one in the bank or at the insurance company or at the local leisure centre, but the estate agent gave them a job. So many of the people who come into agency in the first instance are there almost by chance. It's not necessarily an intent. They just go into that career by the circumstances of their own life, and then they build a career in that environment. So the kind of first message I would say is don't be scared of talking to estate agents, because the chances are, certainly if you are starting to become a professional in this environment and you're doing your own training and you've got mentors and you've read around the subject, you may very well be more knowledgeable and experienced in property in general than the estate agent is, even though the agent themselves has a lot of knowledge and understanding of narrow slices of the property market in the locality where they're based. Now, in terms of what I've said about understanding the estate agency business, I find this to be an absolutely fascinating question, because, and following on from what I've just said about how agents get into property themselves or get into estate agency themselves, I don't think all the estate agents on any given high street necessarily properly understand their own business. And what I mean by that is the perception of estate agency is that estate agents sell houses, or rent houses, but we'll deal with rentals later. So people perceive the estate agency business as being about selling houses, and that the agents are usually rewarded with incentives and bonuses on a pay packet if they sell a house. And yet, that's not really their business, because it's not the seller of the house that it's not the buyer of the house that pays them. So selling the house is not the thing that prompts the buyer of the house to hand over cash to the estate agent. The estate agent is actually working for the person who has a house to sell. So the driver of estate agency business is selling services to sellers of houses. And that's where the agency business starts. There are agencies now, the like of Strike, the online agent, who don't even charge sellers for selling houses. Yeah, but the reason that that's true is because it's not only the sellers of the house that pay the agent. The agent is also very often, more often than not, paid for referrals to lawyers or mortgage brokers, and then other esoteric services. They get paid by removal firms. They might get paid by surveyors. They might get paid by companies that switch utility services. But all of the driver in agency business comes from having houses on their books to sell. And all agencies' marketing is pitched not to sell the house, but to sell the services to sellers.
That's interesting.
Once you kind of get your head around that fundamental, then it allows you to think a little bit differently about how you will approach an estate agent. So we used to get people coming into our agency on a regular basis. We had a very prominent office on a high street in Exeter. our business was called Underhills, and you said I'm an estate agent. We actually sold the last part of our agency a couple of months ago. So we've done 16 years in agency so that you and your listeners don't have to. But we also now no longer have a high street estate agency business. We're just out of it. But we had a high street presence in Exeter, and people would walk into our office and you'd almost know before they'd said anything that they'd just come off a course. They'd be dressed in a shiny suit. They'd have a nice, freshly printed business card. They might have a clipboard, and they would say something like, "Good afternoon. I am a local property investor, and I'm looking to purchase properties at 25% below market value." And you'd almost put your head in your hands and go, "Look, just go back to school, learn something different, approach it in a different manner." But where I'm going with that is that people think if you walk into an estate agent going, "I want to buy a house," that somehow you become a really important person to them, and you're massively overvaluing your own importance in that conversation. Because houses are bought by people who want to buy the house. By what I mean is, I've never heard an estate agent say anything so clever that somebody bought a house accidentally, even though they didn't like it. Equally, I've never seen an estate agent say something so stupid that the person who really wants to buy the house decides they're not going to buy that house because the estate agent's a bit of a knob and they want to get one over on it.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the house will sell. If you put it on the market too high, nobody will go. But then if you drop the price, when you get to a certain level, somebody will want to see it. It will be in their budget. It will be in their area. And as long as you turn up and send out the letters and documents in the right manner, the house will sell. So selling the house is not the agent's biggest problem. The agent's biggest problem is getting the house to sell in the first place. And that is absolutely critical. Now, when I say understanding the agent's model, understanding the agent's business, that's because there are different ways in which estate agency businesses are structured. So you need to understand a little bit about that to understand what the drivers are going to be for the people in the office. Ultimately, when you build a relationship with your local estate agent, you're building a relationship with a person. But if you're going to deliver things into their business that help their business grow, then you have to understand quite how their business works and where that person fits in the picture of the business. So are you all right if I talk a little bit about the structures of agency? Would that be useful?
Yeah, definitely. Understanding the structure of an agency would be beneficial because then it'll give an understanding to the listener, and then the listener can then adapt the way that they operate. So yeah, please, 100%.
Absolutely. So there are three different kinds of estate agency. The first kind is the corporation, a corporate agent. That's major brands that operate across every high street in every town in across the UK, or at least you're dealing with offices numbering into their hundreds that are all owned by the same company. Now, you'd think that would be pretty straightforward to recognise and to spot. And some of those high street agency brands, some of those corporate brands are reasonably obvious. So the Connells, for example, the big kind of red and white bands with the Connells written in the middle is a national agency brand. That's owned by the Sequence Group. They are part of the group that owns the Skipton Building Society. What's not necessarily as obvious is that they also own all of the brands that are kind of like a whiteboard with 4 circles on them. Depending on where you are, you might know them as Fox and Son, or William H. Brown, or Barnard Marcus, or there's half a dozen different names that they trade under with a very similar logo. They're all part of the same corporation. There's also several hundred different agency offices around the country that are branded up with a local name. In where I am in Devon, for example, it's Fulfords. Now, the Fulford family still exist in Devon. They're big landowners. Occasionally, they turn up on sort of BBC Two shows at 5:30 on a weekday about antiques or land or farming or some kind of light entertainment stuff. Gerald Fulford. But the Fulford's estate agency brand was actually bought out by a corporation many, many years ago. Until very recently, it was owned by the Countrywide Group, and the Countrywide Group has now been bought by the Sequence Group that owns Connells and Barnard Marcus and is part of the Skipton Building Society Group. So what you might perceive as being a local brand on your high street may very well be part of a corporation. And the reason that makes a difference, you get a little bit of a clue into it there by the fact that they're all owned by a building society, ultimately, or part of a group with a building society. Those businesses were originally acquired to direct mortgage business towards the building society.
Right. So this isn't actually anything to do with selling houses. It's about creating more wealth through mortgages.
Yeah.
That's great.
Certainly within a group. So yeah, of course they charge for estate agency services, but the person behind the desk that you're talking to, their commission that month will be determined not necessarily just by how many houses they've got instructed on or how many houses they've sold, but also by how many mortgage referrals they've given to the mortgage broker in the back of the room, or how many legal referrals they've given to their in-house conveyancing team, or how many surveys that they've directed to their surveying team. So the dynamics, if you follow the money, their business is very much not just about getting houses to sell, but also getting mortgage referrals, getting legal referrals, and so on.
So interestingly, you could effectively put yourself out of business as me going in as a property investor, wanted to buy some buy-to-lets, by saying, I've got all my team set up. I don't want anything to do with your teams. I don't need a mortgage. I don't need a surveyor. I don't need all these different stakeholders that are required.
Yeah,
could effectively lose your business.
It can put you out of the game. Although it's illegal for an estate agent to say, I am not showing you this property unless you use our broker, unless you use our team. You still hear so many stories of that happening that you know it happens. And the other thing within that context, I mean, personally, I think this is very wrong. This is one of the things that we saw in agency that we thought was wrong. So when we started our business, we wanted to change the way things were done. But if you are a seller of a house, your ideal buyer is a cash buyer, doesn't need a mortgage, doesn't need to sell anything, doesn't even necessarily need a survey because they're just buying it because they've got the money and they can do it on trust. And it's, it might be a middle house of a row of terraces, so they, it's not going to fall down because all the others are holding it up. Whatever it might be, but your perfect buyer is a cash buyer. But if you're the agent sitting behind their desk, that cash buyer who's not using any of your team won't pay you as much as the first-time buyer or the second-time buyer with a property to sell who needs a mortgage, who doesn't really know what's going on. He'll use your broker or your legal services because you pointed them in that direction. That might, in fact, might not just be that they're worth more because you get commission on the referrals, but they might be worth a lot more because you don't get commission on any of it unless you hit the referral targets. So you can be in a circumstance when, as a seller, you're talking to an agent, you think they're working on your behalf. And as the agent, your best interest is served by dealing with a different, less high quality buyer. It shouldn't be like that to my mind, but it is. And if you're a property investor and you want to work with one of those major high street brands or a major corporation, even if they're trading under a little local brand in your area, then you need to play the game a little bit. You're going to have to tell them that you will use their mortgage broker, that you will go through their legal services, because otherwise you'll exclude yourself from a range of opportunities that you might otherwise be able to work with and capitalize on. It might be that you change your mind later in the day, that once you've built a relationship with the seller of the house, once you've got your sale agreed, once you've get to the point that the solicitors are instructed or about to be instructed, then you can roll back and you could say, oh, do you know what? I need this to go through more quickly. I've got my own person. Your mortgage advisor was great, but actually I've got my finance from somewhere else. I don't need them anymore. But if you say those things at the start, then you might not even see the house.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's a tough place to be, especially for somebody trying to buy buy-to-lets. Because if you're going into these agencies and you want to buy it, but then you get all the way through and follow their motions, follow their steps, and then you get to the end and say, I'm using my own team, that could potentially stop it. So it's a bit of a tough circle and a tough battle to have, but I suppose it's nature of the beast.
Yeah, you're right.
Very good insight.
Well, exactly. And the important thing is to once you kind of understand how their business works, then you can respond to that appropriately. And actually, if you bought a couple of houses from an agent, then they will start to see you in a slightly different manner. They will start to take you more seriously. But if you're just starting out and you go into an estate agency and you think that buying a house is going to make you like kind of kingpin in the room, it's not necessarily, and there are other things around it. the next thing I'm going to say applies to all different kind of agencies, because the key thing is getting more houses to sell. So if the property strategy that you're following allows you either to do that or even to bring more business into the agency, then that is a way to build a relationship with the agent. So if you go into an agency and say, I want to buy this house, then you're no different to anybody else on the market, anybody else who walks into the office. But if you can go into an agency and go, I want to buy this house because my intention is to refurbish it and then refinance it and get my money out, for which I'll use your broker and your legal team. So you're getting 2 hits of that cherry because I'll use you all the way through. And then at the end of it, I'm either going to hand it over to your rental department and they can make an ongoing commission for renting it or finding me a tenant. Or even if I'm going to flip properties, then I'm going to sell it and I'm going to sell it back through your agency. Suddenly then you do stand out from the crowd, because you're not just a single buyer or a single transaction, you are repeat ongoing business for them. And that's the kind of conversation that you need to be having quite early in the piece, to allow the agent to understand that you're somebody that they need to be talking to and taking more seriously, because you can bring them more business in the future rather than just a single transaction now.
Very interesting. That's very good to know, especially walking into an agency, working out strategy before, considering all these different aspects and what they might do, and understanding the groups. Is there a way, I mean, I know you offer this in your training, don't you, that you could offer guidance on which corporations own which estate agencies really around the UK? I mean, do they work very similarly?
It's very local. So I wouldn't recognise one of the former Countrywide brands that's now owned by the Sequence Group necessarily off the cuff without actually doing the research. But you can do the research by having a look at their website on Google. A look at the website, rather. You can also Google the company and see if it comes up as part of a corporate group. You can start from the corporate group and then look to which local brands they operate under in your area. Or you can phone the office and you can say, I'm looking at instructing an estate agent or using an estate agent. Can you let me know, are you an independent or are you part of a corporate group? The other major corporate group that people will know, they won't know the name of the group necessarily because they're called LSL, and that isn't a high street brand, but you may very well know Your Move or Reed's Rains. Both of those brands are owned by LSL. So they're the 2 really big players now in the UK market. You've got the Sequence Group and then you've got LSL. And if you ask the agents, by and large, they will tell you. They won't know why you're asking necessarily, but they won't be offended. And I'd say to anybody as well, don't be scared of having conversations where you don't declare your hand to an agent. Just phone them up. I'm interested in this. Can you tell me that? And they'll tell you. And you go, okay, that's brilliant. Now I know. Thank you. Bye. You don't have to leave your details every time you make a call. You might want to have a couple of email addresses that you can drop so you see what's going on without telling them who you actually are when you talk to them from your real email address with a view to doing business. Moving on from the corporate estate agents, the sort of the opposite end of that are the little one-man band independent or one-woman band independent agencies. You'll find them in every town. There'll be a single office sitting there with the owner managers sitting at the back of the office. You'll also see agencies that have started from there and have grown to maybe 2, 3, 4 offices, for which this also applies. And the key thing in those offices is that the money that they receive from the sale of houses or the sale of services pays for the kids' food on the table and the family holiday and the Christmas presents that they're about to stick on the credit card. It'll pay that off in January. So those businesses and those owner-manager businesses in particular are ones that are going to be far more open to building a relationship with and creating deals through. The corporate agent may not have any flexibility, may not be allowed to do some of the deals that you might want to do. I know there's a very much a kind of a sort of frowned upon culture towards rent-to-rent property strategies within the corporate agencies. But for the local independent, as long as they understand what you're bringing to the party for them, they have both the authority and the vested interest to listen to and very often to do those kind of more creative deals that a lot of the people in the community would want to propose. So I would suggest actually that the independent agents in your local town are your best friends when it comes to building relationships with agents, because they've got they've got the deals, but they've got the authority to do the deals and to listen to and understand and be flexible about the way in which they organise their workload and their income. So all those things I've said previously also apply. But if you're buying the property, say from a corporate agent, and you've already realised that you're not going to be able to build a relationship with that agent because the manager in the office just doesn't have the license to do that, then maybe what you're doing is, once you've got through the door and you've got that property that you're interested in purchasing, or that you're interested in whichever way, you can then take some of the subsidiary business to the independent agent you want to build your relationship with. So maybe, although you've agreed to use the in-house lawyer at the commercial firm, at the corporate firm, you actually then take the business to the in-house or to a referral from the independent, because the independent's still getting paid for that.
Yeah.
And to them especially, getting more business on their books is really important. So I know a lot of us in the community do direct-to-vendor marketing, where you'll be sending out flyers that say "we buy houses" or "offers made, quick sale," whatever it might be. When you get those calls in, some of the people you can deal with directly because you're the best solution. But quite a lot of those people who would call in response to a flyer or a marketing campaign like that, their best solution will still be to use a conventional estate agent for a conventional sale. And you can just throw those leads in the bin, or you can use those to build a relationship with your local independent agent. You can go to the local independent and say, look, I can give you all of my leads from direct-to-vendor marketing. And once you start to bring them 1, 2, 3 people that they can get instructions from, potentially to sell property, suddenly then you're a very valuable person in their office, even if at that point they haven't given you any business at all. There is no cost to building that relationship, but the benefits will come back somewhere along the line in the reciprocal relationship that you build with someone.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've not even considered that. So I do send out leaflets, and I know a lot of people do. So if they're listening, I think this is an eye-opener for them, just to get a foot in the door with an agency without taking in the standard coffees. Because I mean, a lot of people take in the gifts to them. I personally don't. I'll take in a coffee just for me and the person I'm chatting to, just to thank them for the time. But I think this is better than taking in a coffee. Or if you're one of the people,
absolutely.
Everything else is putting business in there.
I'm not going to discourage people from doing nice things and building up relationships with people through friendly gestures. But if you think because you've dropped in a box of biscuits to the estate agent every couple of weeks, or chocolates or whatever it might be, that agent is going to preference you for giving your business over somebody else, then that's not necessarily the case. It might help, and it certainly all helps in part of the building of a relationship. But it's not like that's the magic secret formula that's going to get you at the top of the list for the estate agency. If as an estate agent owner, I have a choice between dealing with someone who gave me a box of chocolates and dealing with someone who brought me 3 instructions last month, it's a no-brainer. Thanks for the chocolates. I'm going to use those as incentives for my staff and give them away at a Christmas party, or just it'll make us all feel good, but it won't get you any more business. It's personal relationships. So if it turns out that you and the person who owns the agency happen to support the same football team, and you can get them tickets to a game, then yes, they're going to be positively inclined towards you if you can do things for your friends and make them into friends. But still, the key driver to an agent is their bottom line. And whereas in a corporate agency, that will be a bottom line within group numbers that they're handed down from head office. For your independent estate agency, then it's the bottom line is the paying the mortgage at the end of the month for the person in the back of the office. So they are much more inclined to be able to deliver on the kind of things that you want from a mutually beneficial relationship. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to be aware of. There is a sort of halfway house, which are the franchised-based estate agencies. Now, they might be brands that you recognise from the high street. So Martin & Co. is an impression in Exeter. And there's a number of other brands that you'd see and you think, oh, yeah, there's dozens of those. I see them wherever I go in the country. They might still be owned by the person who's sitting in that office. Because just like Subway or just like McDonald's, the person who owns that local office in your town has paid the corporation for the brand and the system, but it's their business. They are the owner of that business, and they pay an ongoing franchise fee for the right to use the systems and the logos. They're interesting, I think, because very often franchise holders are people who have had successful business careers, not necessarily all that cheap to buy an estate agency franchise, to pay in and get set up. But people do that when they are accomplished businessmen or women, but that don't necessarily have a background in agency. So your franchise owner may very well have made their money in, I don't know, engineering or software design, or I don't know, what, some other kind of aspect of business. And they've thought long term, well, what they want to do now is to own a franchise that they can build value into, that they might sell 10 years down the tracks, that they understand the incomings and outgoings of the business, but they don't know the detail of how to run an estate agency. So they buy the system and they pay the staff. But they're accomplished business people with an element of autonomy over what they do. So they will be potentially very receptive to relationships with creativity and that bring things into their business that they can then reciprocate, more so than the corporates would be, even though to an untrained eye they look like a corporate because they're the same brand as every other, different high streets up and down your area.
Would you say the same advice of just calling and saying, is this a franchise, is this owned by a franchise?
You can. The example I gave, Martin Co., and about half a dozen other companies of that nature are all owned by a company called the Property Franchise Group. So if you go onto Google, look at the Property Franchise Group, that will cover about half of those brand names. If there's other companies, if you Google estate agency franchises, then you'll see the companies who are selling agency franchises, and therefore you'll be able to pick some of them out. But yeah, you can. I mean, there's no harm in asking somebody and being upfront and saying, I'm doing some research in the local property market. I've got some properties to sell in the future. Are you part of a franchise group? Are you a corporation? Are you an independent? But the key thing is for you as the property professional to do your research. Just as I would never buy a house or even take a house on a rent strategy, rent-to-rent strategy, without having gone into land registry and paid me £3 to find out who actually owns it and which mortgage company actually has a charge on it, I would never consider going and having a conversation with an estate agent about a property deal or something I was interested in, without really understanding before I start what kind of business I'm talking to. Because then you know the limitations of what you can say and do and offer, and you know what you can expect back in return.
Yeah, I think that's vitally important. Due diligence for everything. So I do the same. I'll go to land registry to find out all the charges. I'll pay for their service just to get that information. I mean, it costs £6 and you can get all this information about a property you're going to buy. So yeah, why not do it against an estate agency? Find out who owns it, what type of business they are, whether it's independent, franchise, or owned by a corporation. Yeah,
absolutely. So if I had a question that I would suggest that people start with when they talk to estate agencies, that question should be, what can I do for you? Because if you can deliver to the agent what the agent needs within their own business, then they are going to take you seriously. And in that context, they might have someone who buys a property every month off them, but the buying of property from an estate agent is not the big deal. If they know that you might only buy one property from them, but you're going to refinance it through their company, they're going to flip it and let it out through their company or sell it through their company, then it doesn't matter that there's an agent, that there's somebody who buys 10 properties a year, 20 properties a year. You still go ahead of them in the queue because you're offering the agency's business more. Besides which, even if you've got, if you're in Peterborough, which is where I happen to be talking to you from at the moment, and you've got one of the biggest property entrepreneurs on your doorstep, they still don't buy everything in their own town. There's always deals to be done. There's always other properties. But don't let the idea that because you're new, you don't have the opportunity or the wherewithal to compete with a seasoned professional get into your head as a concept, because that's just not the case. You just need to be a professional, understand who you're talking to, understand what you can give them, and give it to them.
Get out there and do it. Go and speak to them and engage.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I totally agree with that.
And I've said you've seen me present on this, but ultimately, you can not just become the most valuable person to that estate agent, but you can actually, if you understand what you want and you understand what they need, and you can marry the two together, then you can effectively get the estate agent to work for you. So, just by way of example, if you know, for example, that your strategy is to take 2-bedroom terraced houses and to reconfigure the interior to make them into 3-bedroom houses and get the capital uplift from adding additional room, at which point then you're going to refinance and you might either sell or you might just pull the money back out of the deal. That's a reasonably common strategy and one that's taught by many or most of the property trading companies.
for listening to the Brighter Skies podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. To find out more about the work that Gary does, please visit his website, brighterskiesproperties.com. And if you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave a rating and review on the platform where you heard it. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.